All right, welcome back to another one. So we're gonna go ahead and do a mixing tutorial today. Not gonna say a whole lot, don't like long intros, so we're gonna get straight into it. We're gonna check out the song from the very beginning. No title quite yet, however it will be on an upcoming product soon to be announced. But let's go ahead and just check this out. Now we're gonna check this out. I'm gonna leave it on the tuning, right? Don't wanna be too disrespectful, but we're gonna leave everything else off so you can hear the levels of where we were at the start. All right, so let's go ahead and check it out. Alright, so something that you're gonna notice, right? You're probably like, man, why are these vocals so quiet, right? Now, reason being is because you should always be recording at 0 VU. On average, you should be hitting 0 VU on your recordings. So the first thing I usually do in the recording stage, right? This is like right before mixing, but this is also going to affect your mixing in general. I have MV meter. Now this is a free download. It's in VST3 form. I can't remember if it's in AAX. It probably is, right? I'm pretty sure Pro Tools uses AAX exclusively. So if I have it, it probably is, right? But free download, get this. Now it has different modes, right? Peak, RMS 20, 14, 12, and then these things, don't know what they are. Probably have to do with like podcasting. And we have our VU. Now, on average, our signal is going to hit right here at 0, right? So if I go ahead and just like play like a part right here, let's see what it hits. Girl, you know I'll be there. Time of day, time I'll be there. I just want to hold you. I just want to touch you. I just want to kiss you. Baby girl, I told you that I'll be there. Big part and a dynamic vocal that are going to jump, but on average you can see that we're hitting about 0 VU or just below that. So that's kind of how you want to set your gain on your preamp to make sure you're hitting about there, and for your big jumps it's okay. Now the next step is I want to pretend as if that I'm actually recording with analog gear. Now I used to use a lot of analog gear, especially for like a nice outboard preamp and then like a couple outboard compressors, but now I go back to plugins because it's just a little bit simpler. I find it to be, why spend the money for that extra 5-10% difference, right? Your mixing skill is going to make the biggest difference. So what I usually use right here is the this is the Teletronics LA2A plugin, and as well I use the Wave CLA76. I like to leave it on the black mode just because it has more of a transparent sound. It's not as saturated. Typically I like to keep it relatively clean, but it does have a very distinct sound regardless. So first I use this LA2A because this one has a like standard attack of about like 10, and based on the signal the attack changes. It is same there with the release. The release changes based on how much signal is going into it. So based off of that, it really just has its own sound, but it can compress your bigger dynamics, your bigger peaks, and then some smaller peaks it'll compress it less hard. So it still kind of gives it a natural type of characteristic, but it gives it like a nice fat sort of a saturated analog type of sound, followed by 1176, which again 1176 has its own sound as well. However though, this one is a little bit more transparent in terms of like how it acts. Now I use the LA2A first to catch most of these big peaks, so if you notice right here, this isn't to catch most of them, right? I might hit like -10, -7, and 1176 I might hit like -1, -3 tops, right? So this one is first, and then we have our 1176. So let's go ahead and check this vocal out. Girl, you know I'll be there. Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there. I just wanna hold you. I just wanna touch you. I just wanna kiss you. Baby girl, that I told you that I'll be there. Trust me, girl, I can't promise you the world. So whenever you're getting your levels, you want to have similar type of gain reduction on these plugins. Now you can give more or less depending on the flavor you're trying to get, but I've always found that this is how you can keep it very natural sounding, not too compressed but not too like under compressed. Especially while you're recording, always want to have these two plugins up. Now I leave these on every single track here. So I have that on my main vocal, right, and then I have that on this other track here, which I just use for because we have an overlay, right? So my sorry, I can't even talk for a second, right? My hook kind of goes into my verse, right? So it overlaps. So because of that, I have to have two separate ones, right? So I can mess with them individually. However, though, I actually bust these together into a bus here. So main summing right here. Notice main summing is my output, and it's going to an input of main summing. Now make sure that when you get a bus, that two things go into, make sure this is auxiliary, right? Make sure the bus is auxiliary, AUX. Now, from this is where I do my actual mixing on the main vocal. So the first thing that I did here on the main vocal was a bit of EQ. Now, in this instance, I just did a high pass filter. I did a high pass up to 152 just because based on the type of song that I had, I really liked for the song to sort of have a more modern sound, right? So rolling off, right, like plus 100, right? Quite a bit, almost 200. However, though, I didn't go nearly to 200 just because I still wanted this to kind of have a little bit of body. Now that was based off of my vocal because I kind of tend to have thinner vocals when I sing, so I can get away with rolling off more at the bottom, but you still want to leave a little bit though, so you have something to work with. So I rolled that off, so you know, before and after, just to see like the small change that it made, but it cleans up some of my low end. Typically, if you can clear up some low end on anything, usually do it because it takes away from your technical headroom, right? Your actual level. Your low frequencies always will take up more room than higher frequencies. So your lower frequencies are always going to be about up here. Higher frequencies start to go down here. And that's always going to be a great indicator of, hey, if you can take away some low end from something and without it sounding really different, then go ahead and do that. All right, so before and after, check that out.
Girl, you know I'll be there. Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there. I just wanna hold you.
Right, so not too big of a difference. If you notice on these meters, right, we're getting some more frequencies down here, less frequencies here. Now, typically though, like say you have a vocal, right, and like maybe you're getting a little less down here, but just a little something, go ahead and cut some of that if you can. Again, use your ears to decide where you should stop, but if you can get away with it, definitely do that, right? So that's just that EQ. Now our compression. Now remember, these first two plugins is like the recording phase, the way I think about it, and now we're in like the mixing phase on our actual bus. Now, if you have like a song that like there's no overlap in like your hook and verse and you have it all in one track, just go ahead and do that. Save yourself some CPU with your plugins, and then you can just straight up drop another compressor here. But the great thing about putting it into an auxiliary bus is that you just get more slots here to work with. So always something that actually works out, you know, pretty well here. Now I have the threshold set to the point where we have our average level, right, where average things are kind of sitting, and then there's big peaks. So I visually with my eyes will set my threshold based on where it kind of sits and then where the big peaks are at, right? So I usually set my threshold to where some of my lower peaks are at, that way that I'm getting a good place of where I want the vocal to sit. So if I just play this right here with it on.
Girl, you know I'll be there. Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there.
That be there, right? That part right there, right? That's like a lower signal, a lower level that's coming in. So I set it right there, like right above that, and then everything can jump above that, and that's where my compression can begin. So now the next thing that I actually like to do from right here is I usually always set my ratio to 2.0. That way I'm just getting like the bare regular version of some compression, and then my release is set with Howard Smith music, right? So if you just Google like Howard Smith reverb delay calculator, and that will actually give you all the times based on your BPM, right? So my BPM was 123. All right, so my BPM was 123. So what I do, right, howardsmithsounds.com, reverb and delay time calculator, I'm gonna put it into here, right? So boom, 123. Now, typically, whenever I use a release, I usually like for my release to either be a 16th note or an 8th note. Now, you have a faster vocal, you can probably get away with the 32nd, 132 note, or if you want it like even longer, sometimes you have a slower vocal, like harder singing type of vocal, you can do a quarter note. Now, it's 243.9, right? So you go into here, boom, I got 243. Now, if you try to put 243.9, it'll just round to a whole number. So even like with my reverb times, I just set this to like, you know, 243, and then the point whatever, I just ignore that, just kind of small thing, not too big a deal, right? So boom, so I set this with my eyes, right? Kind of use my ears a little bit. Once this is affected, I set this with the time because it'll make it pretty perfect for yourself. This starts off on 2, and then from there I start adjusting my attack. Now I always start my attack on 12, and I start to lower it or raise it based on what I'm hearing while the vocal's playing. So I get to a place where it's doing a pretty good job of giving me some reduction and evening out the vocal, like the initial clamping of when the vocal's coming in, it kind of evens it out. However, I don't want it to pump, right? So I don't want it to sound like it's turning something down too much where it almost sounds like it's getting quieter than it should be, versus other parts of the vocal. And that's how I use my ears to set my attack. And then I adjust my ratio lower on here, right? But raising the ratio more and more and more until I feel like I have the fatness of the vocal where I want it. You're gonna get a point where if you kind of keep raising your ratio higher and higher and higher, it almost sounds like it's not really making too much of a difference, or sometimes it'll sound like it's over compressing, right? It'll sound like it's kind of ruining your vocal. So again, use your ear. That is the taste, but that's what I typically do with that first compressor, just to even out the vocal a lot more at this point here. So before and after.
Girl, you know I'll be there. Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there. I just wanna hold you, I just wanna touch you.
Right, and so the way that I set my makeup gain here is actually based on like what I'm hearing. So I don't make it perfectly like, oh, I got 1.5 gain reduction, so I turn it up 1.5. Not at all, because sometimes your vocal actually sounds too loud if you do that, right? Or sometimes it'll sound too quiet. So I start craning up the gain until it's at a volume that I actually like, and then I'll before and after see how I feel about it. Now sometimes your gain, in terms of how it sounds, it's actually louder or quieter, right? But you do know that you did get some reduction to even out your vocal. You're not thinking about saving level or anything here. You're thinking more about how can I just even out my vocal and get to be at a level that sounds good, right? All this subjective is not so much about your meters here. So that's that. Now from here, I go into some multiband compression. Now, the reason at this point that I chose to go into multiband compression, because now at this point it's subjective. Your next decision's subjective, right? The first few decisions, I always do that, right? Always get my levels with these two, and then I do like EQ, high pass. I might even like take out some frequency that I feel like I want to take certain things out, and then I always go into a little bit of compression. Now, in this instance, I chose to do this right here because I felt as if, okay, I have a vocal that's it sounds pretty good. Like I'm not too bothered by it. However, there is some variation in the frequencies in terms of how loud they are, right? So if you think about it in terms of bands, right? We have a low, a middle, a high mid, and a high band. If you think about how you're singing and based on like the thing that you're saying, or just even rapping, just your performance, right? If you think about, there's small variations in level based on what you're saying and how you're saying it. So if you want that big modern sound that's super consistent and super in your face, then you need to use some multiband compression. Now if you want more of an older school sound, a more natural type of performance sound, then don't use multiband compression because it's going to make things too consistent. But again, this is based on taste, this is based on genre, this is based on music style, this is based on artist preference, right? It's all about that. So right here, I did this up because, you know, I wanted this more modern R&B sound for this type of song, so it made sense, so I did it. So the way that I usually set this is I go ahead and do learn, let the vocal play, it sets these bands for me, boom, let the AI do it. Now I'm here, I click all, so we're on like individual bands, I click all, and then I select the bands that are all linked, and then if I start playing this, I just pull them all down until, just like we set our initial compressor, until that's at the average level of, usually your mids have the most energy in your vocal at this point. So I said to where the average level is at, and then where it's jumping. Same thing like that. So I'll do that, like just watch.
Girl, you know I'll be there. Nighttime or daytime, I'll be.
The way that I set those is I'll unlink this, and then I'll individually do the same thing with these other bands, right? Now it says compression, but this is just threshold, right? This is just regular threshold. Now, at this point, what I usually do is actually, like even right before this, at which point you do doesn't matter. However, I always like to start off with my ratio for this limiter section at 1, right? That way there's no limiting going on. I set the attack to 0 because if there is limiting going on, right, a limiter should be instant, so I just put it 0 anyways. And then for the release, again, I like to do a higher release on this one, right? So example, if this release here is 243, right, because that's what I usually like to play with vocals, right, about an 8th note. Sometimes a quarter note is a slow performance, but an 8th note, right? So 243, awesome. Now from this point right here, I go a little bit higher. So I have here, this should be 487. It wasn't though, it's 521, right? So maybe in this instance, I just decided to just leave that how it was, and I didn't touch it because this is the limiter's release. But it's good to kind of set it just in case, so that you know, if there is any limiting that's happening to go on, it'll still be in line with your song, so it won't like throw nothing off too weird. So just like a little like tip. But later on though, in my multiband compression, you're gonna see that I do actually end up using this limiter as well for extra control, but we'll ignore that for now. So right here though, my ratio, I usually always start off the ratio at 2.0, right? That's a 2 to 1 essentially. And so once the ratio is set, my release is set with my reverb delay time calculator, right? It's just quarter notes and stuff. And then my attack, I always start just at about 10, and then I'll adjust it from here, right? 10 or 12, but usually about 10 for this. And then I'll just do it, right? So I play,
Girl, you know I'll be there.
all this is going on, and then once I got about where I wanted to, I link everything and I adjust my attacks as a unit, and then I adjust like my ratio as a unit if I need to change it, or I adjust my release if I need to change it, right? So this is 243, and double this is you know, what is that? That's 486, then, or 487 point whatever. Then I'll go ahead and change that, right? But you just kind of see which one you like, and as you get better and better, you'll know what you're looking for. But that's all we do for this. So now let's go before and after.
Girl, you know I'll be there. Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there. I just wanna hold you.
Right, so just like that. Now in terms of level, it didn't really change too much, right? However, it's a little bit more consistent in terms of frequency spread, like level wise. It's very, very consistent now, right? And that's what I went for on the song. That's what I wanted to do next. And now for your gain, I just hit auto, and this does a great job at doing the right amount of gain. When it comes to multiband compression, on a technical level, you do actually want to let get the gain back that you're losing, because you do want this to be a very, very consistent vocal. And because there's such a difference in band level in terms of like gain, essentially, you do want that to be automatically compensated, so when you before and after, you can clearly hear the kind of difference you're making. Regular compression is really, I just do it by ear based on how loud or quiet I want it to be post compression. But in this one, you want to make that difference. Now sometimes if for some reason I feel like it's still too quiet or too loud, again, you can just grab this knob and still just adjust the gain post, right? So it doesn't make a difference. So next thing after this, I like to open up an analog type of EQ. Now I have both of these plugins. There's the Wave SSL EQ. This is the first one, the OG one, and then there's the SSL, the EV2, right? That's Wave's updated version of this. I feel like the EV2 has a much more modern sound, and then this one has a more analog, old school sound. So in this instance, this is a pretty modern type of song. So because of that, I wanted to add a little bit more old school saturation, a bit more old school vibe. Now, the first few things that we did, right, we took care of things on a more technical level in a sense. There's some taste to it, right, but a more technical, like just getting levels right, getting, you know, some frequencies out of there that we didn't want. Now it's like, okay, now it's like the taste, right? Now I'm like, okay, how much can I milk this vocal? How much can I boost? How much can I push out of this, right? So if you notice, right, on this band, right, it's at 6,280, right? I boosted 1.5, right? At this band, 2.27, right? 2,270, I took away -2. And then in this instance, right, this is 450, I boosted by 2. Now, the thing about this is that out of these 3 bands, 2 of them are boosting. So typically what I do is I will have this, right, and I'll have another one of these, right? I put it at the very end, so it's after everything. I only use this to find like frequencies that I'm looking for, right? So for example, right, this is 2,270. I'm pretty sure one of these has that, just about, right? So boom. So right here, right, I solo it, and then you'll have the band going on, right? Boom. I'll adjust my cue through here and find exactly what I'm hearing. So the exact frequencies that I think sound nice that I want to boost, or the exact frequencies that I want to take away. And after I do that, right, I just use this to find it, and then I can like turn this back off, and then I'll actually go to this EQ here, and I'll go put in the frequency that I'm at, I'll put in the cue that I'm at, and then from there I will boost the gain on this EQ to taste, because this type of EQ has a specific sound to it. Now in the process of like these frequencies here, right, if I was boosting 2 and maybe I use this one to boost, at some point in between these 2 EQ boosts, or after both of these EQ boosts, I might have been like, okay, now that I boosted though, I feel like now this frequency at 2,270 I should reduce, right? And so I'll go find with this one what I want to actually reduce, like what I'm hearing. That's why I solo it, and then I'll go ahead and find it, put that cue that I found, and then boom, I'll go to taste and take away -2.2 in this instance, right? So that's why a lot of times on EQs you'll be like, okay, well, you know, why is it on this EQ you only did a high pass and you didn't cut here, but on this EQ you decided to cut? Because in the context of the moment, I felt like now on this one here, right? Now on this one here, at this time, I needed to take something away, so I did. And that's how mixing is, right? You may not have a problem with something earlier on because there might not actually be a problem, but once you start making adjustments, something in the vocal creeps up or pops up that you really don't want there, and so now you have to make that adjustment. So we'll hear before and after on this EQ.
Girl, you know I'll be there. Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there. I just wanna hold you, I just wanna touch.
So if you notice this vocal, it almost sounds like, not to say so much louder, but like it just sounds thicker, more like, I guess, warm in a sense, right? And more fat and in your face. And that's exactly what I accomplished through here, because this vocal, I wanted to have a thicker, more analog sound because it's such a modern type of sound. I still wanted to add some of that old school type of saturation to it to complement that sound. So boom, that's it. Now from here, I usually like to finish off, like once I get to a point I'm like, okay, I don't know what else to do, I usually still add a little bit more compression. I like using this Pt1 660 compressor because of the fact that it will only do like 1 dB, 2 dB, 3 dB before it like bugs out. Like not bugs out, but it doesn't sound good anymore, right? So I usually get that much dB, but it just has this sense of like, it adds some warmth, it adds like a little bit of bottom to your vocal, a little bit more thickness to your vocal, but it just gives like a little bit more compression without overdoing it. So it's like a slight touch, right? But it has its own character that adds. Now when you open this up, always put your output gain back to 0 because it always opens at like 2 dB or something like that. And so over here I adjust my threshold, and so if you notice here, I'll have it on. I'll show you how much it's actually reducing in this instance.
Girl, you know I'll be there. Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there.
Like a big part right here.
But I'll be there.
-1 about 2, right? Now, because on these big parts, a lot of the compression from beforehand is being taken care of. So by the time you get here, the vocal are pretty consistent. So it's only compressing a little bit more in general, right? So it's also a good tip to know that if this one isn't working like really any harder on a big part right here that you can see compared to here, then you know that you've done a pretty good job at getting your other compression beforehand done well. If this one's jumping real big right there, then maybe you should go ahead and get a little bit more, bring your threshold down a bit more in your previous compressors, or raise your ratios or lower your attacks a bit more, right? So that's a great way to kind of know if, are you really at that finish point yet? So we got that done. Now, a lot of times, not all the times, but a lot of times I'll kind of feel as if I need a little bit of de-essing. Because through compression, right, you're bringing things up, or you're EQing, you're boosting them high and something like that. And then it gets to a point where things get kind of spitty, right? You get like S's, T sounds, P sounds, CH sounds, right? So you're going s, t, 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 p, p, p. Not so much P of a pop filter, right? But you even get a p, 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 or a ch, 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 or a k, k, k. You get these kind of sounds, right? So the de-esser, essentially what's gonna happen is you'll see on those parts, right? And you'll listen right here. You'll see on those parts that on those type of sounds, the meter's just gonna jump, right? So I set it to where the vocal jumps at that, and I set it a little bit low, and then where it's gonna jump, I have it set for my threshold, and it takes care of it. Now, I feel like it's reducing too much, then I'll like raise up this threshold so that it's not killing it so much. And once it sounds more natural, but I'm still getting some reduction, that I know, okay, that's about as much as de-essing I can get here. So we'll see how like it's jumping around here.
That I'll be there. Trust me, girl, I can't promise you the world, but I promise my time.
Right, so you get right. So it's just getting a little bit of those giant jumps right there, only at those frequencies around 5506. Now, when you open up this plugin, it always comes up to about 5506. Now, you feel like you want to raise the frequency up a little higher, right? So you're getting less of a giant effect because it is a side chain. You can, if you click this and turn it to like a band like this instead of more like a filter, essentially. I'm sorry, not a, yeah, something like that, right? It'll kind of only affect around these actual frequencies, versus this is more of a general lowering. So like from the high frequencies down to 50, 506, it's going pop, pop, pop. But if you set it to the other option, right here, it's going to be more like a bell. So it's going to be like this, and it's going to dip at those frequencies by not affecting this. I just feel like I get a cleaner sound if I just leave the sidechain right there. That's my opinion, but sometimes, hey, if it works for you, it works for you. You can always do something else. So boom, now we're done. Now remember, this right here, this is literally nothing right here, right? So I just leave it off, or you can just take it off at this point. Now pretty much I got the vocals sounding pretty good, right? Now something that I noticed in this mix was in the transition from here to here, it almost felt as if like this part here got quiet, and then once this part was done, this part got super loud. Now initially I felt like, oh man, I need to actually go ahead and manually bring the level down, right, and adjust it with like a with this line right here, right? Like put this to put like waveform, put to the volume and adjust it. But I ended up not having to, and I'll explain why here in a moment, right? But it was actually very interesting, but it works out like that sometimes. Any type of chopping of the vocal like this, right, to clean up the breaths and stuff like that, or anything like level adjustments like I'm mentioning, I usually wait till the end of my mix, so I'm at the very, very end, right before I do Melodyne. So usually what happens is I have Melodyne here, but I usually leave this slot completely open, and at the very end, once I'm done chopping all that type of stuff, right, so it's like the super end, then I'll drop an instance of Melodyne and do my final pitch correction. But I will have this auto-tune artist on from the recording stage all the way through. That way I'm getting the pretty much general, but that last bit of pitch correction, I'll use Melodyne, but it's after all these corrections, because if not, it'll just record all your breaths and stuff, and it's not gonna sound too good, right? So boom, we're there. Now we got pretty much all that done right there, right? Boom. Now at this point right here is usually where your effects happen. Now on your effects, you can set your effects before you do all this mixing right here, or you can just do it dry and then add them at the end. It's your choice, but sometimes I do like to hear my effects going on, have those already set. That way I'm hearing the changes with them and I can adjust them as I need to while I'm mixing, or you do it at the end and then you'll get a different type of feel, a different type of context. It's really your choice. Sometimes one works better than the other, but it always just kind of depends on the situation or your taste, right, or your workflow. So we'll talk about the effects now since we're here. So boom, the first one is our reverb, right? I always use like a plate reverb. It's like a very modern type of sound, very nice sounding, so I usually stick with that. Now we have this Lex plate. I think this is the best sounding reverb there is. The Lexicon native reverb, just best one in my opinion. I love it. So usually I have the preset on this large plate 1 here, and it'll open up. Pre-delay is always like on 10. And these are always like something random, right? So if you use Howard Smith, right, I usually choose like one of the lowest numbers. So like a 1, 2, and a 56 note is usually what I'll go for. Sometimes a 1, 128, and one of these numbers is what I'll choose for a pre-delay. But usually whatever number is closer to 10 is what I'll choose, right? But sometimes I don't, right? So this is, I left it at 10, but usually it's a little bit more dialed in if you do. I just didn't for some reason here. Now, again, this is 1.8, right? So if you notice here, right, I have 1.9 on this one bar. Now, I'm pretty sure I chose 1.9. It might have set to 1.8 just because that's just what it decided to do, or maybe I just had it set to 1.9 and pull it down just a little bit. But that's a great thing because you can at least get the general area, and if you want to adjust from there, you definitely can, right? So remember, nothing is set in stone. You can always make your own decisions, right? So I set my reverb time like that. Now, if I wanted like a really, really long reverb, I would have set like like double of a bar, right? So this is just a bar right here. You just times 2 that on like a calculator on your phone, or pull up a calculator on Google or something, and then boom, now you have a super long reverb, right? So like a medium one and a long one, and then a half bar right here would be like a short reverb, right? So that's how you kind of know short reverb, medium, long is when you double it. So I usually set that. Now this return high cut, to me this almost sounds like what the Diffusion is. I know that this says Diffusion and this at 100%. I usually don't even touch the Diffusion. Maybe I show it more often, you know, we'll see if I do it in the future or not, but usually this return high cut kind of gives me the feeling of Diffusion. So what I do is I start pulling this down so I feel like it's at a good place. And then this reverb out frequency, wherever it comes in, I leave it, right? I make my adjustments, boom. Then I take this and I boost it all the way up, and then I slowly start pulling it down until I like how much I've cut out. Because this is actually a low pass filter, so this will legitimately cut frequencies out. This gives more of a almost like diffusion-y type of sound. So I like to touch this one first. That way I'm not really cutting them out completely, but I'm kind of lowering them. And then I start to cut frequencies for real with this. Bass, I usually don't touch it. early level I don't touch it unless I feel like it sounds like it's bouncing off too many walls, because that's what reverb is. I might lower it, but in this instance I didn't feel like I had to, and then boom, I'm good. Now when I set my reverb, I have this maxed out, so like I'll have this set to 0 right here. I'll make all my adjustments, and then I'll bring it down and adjust my level based on like how I want it to be. Now typically with reverb, what's going to happen is you're always going to set it to something, and then maybe you'll pause it because you had to go to the restroom, so you'll come back and you'll be like, oh, it's too much reverb, right? So just to save yourself that, whatever you feel like you set as like, oh, it's good, pull it down a little bit more, so as the mix goes on, you will feel like it's still good later on, if that makes sense. At that point, if you still feel like adjusting a little less, you can, but that'll just save yourself some time and save yourself some stress from like you can't set your reverb right. Or maybe you don't even take a break, you go to the car the next day or something, and then you're like, oh man, too much reverb, it's washed out. Just save yourself a headache, right? So let's go ahead and just listen before and after with this reverb on.
Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there. I just wanna hold you, I just wanna touch you, I just wanna kiss you. Baby girl, that I told you that I'll.
Right, so at the end I stopped it, you kind of heard the tail of that reverb. While I was going, you didn't hear it. It kind of gave a bit of a feel, but not a big difference. Now with a lot of songs, you want your reverb to kind of be like that, where it's not really that audible, but it's kind of like if you turn it on and off, you can feel the difference, right? And then if I pause it, you might hear the tail end, so that's how you know there is reverb, right? So you want the sound that's not really there, unless you have the type of song where you want it to be super reverberant and super obvious that it's there, then yeah, you can have a higher level, but typically you want it to be not as auditory. Now from here, I like to do my delay. Now on the delay, what I'll always do is wherever my reverb is set, I'll hit Alt and then I'll left click and drag underneath, and so it'll pop up with the settings I've already set, because that's the reverb I want for the song in terms of all its settings. And then I'll always take the mix down to 50%, and I'll adjust it up or down based on how much reverb I actually want. So like if I have the delay maxed out, right, I can always bring it back to 0 so I can hear it really well. I'll adjust this reverb so it sounds pushed back, because when that delay is just a little too dry, because remember it's a dry vocal going into it, it's not a reverbed vocal, it'll kind of be just too in your face, right? So when you just put some reverb on it, it kind of pushes it back more, and so it kind of blends, especially when you get to low levels. If you have a dry delay, it'll still be a little too auditory because it's a little bit too clean. So I put some reverb on it just to kind of like wash out the delay a little bit, just so it kind of sits in the back more, so it doesn't sound like a main vocal so much, it sounds more like a vibe in the back. So once I have that set, then I start messing with this. Now typically I always use a quarter note. Now sometimes, you know, you might use an eighth note or something, but it just depends on the song, right? Again, it's just taste. This delay part here, how it's delaying, it's just the taste. It always is the taste, whatever you want. And then feedback, again, this is also the taste, right? How many repeats you want. But typically I always do 60 or 40 on the feedback. Now technically it's 6 repeats or 5 repeats, right? Like 10 is 1, 20 is 2, 30 is 3. But to me, I just feel like once you get below 50, it just sounds a little too boring, doesn't have enough vibe to it. So I usually always use 50 or 60 unless I specifically want that, but most songs I just don't. So right, so it's always 50 or 60 based on taste. I always try to just take it to 40, but it always kills it for me, so one of those two. So once we have this set, then from there I'll adjust this. So I usually open this up and already have this high pass somewhere around here, just because they don't have too much body from the original vocal. But then I always typically have it set here, right? I'll use the low pass to start pushing it back by taking out some of them high frequencies with the low pass, and then I'll be like, okay, cool, that's pushed back enough, and then I'll start to adjust this how thin or thick I want it to be to make it fit. Again, both of these are to taste, to taste, to taste, to taste, to taste, to taste. All that's to taste. Now analog, there's different like type of vibes you can get. I usually like it on 2. That's just use my favorite one of all. Sometimes 4 sounds really good, but I usually just get lazy about it and just do 2. But if I really want to vibe from it, I'll usually do 4. But again, it's your opinion on that, right? So all this is set, boom, and then we set our level. Again, in this song, I didn't want you to really hear it, so I have it pulled back really far. So let's see before and after you can even hear it at all.
Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there. I just wanna hold you, I just wanna touch you, I just wanna.
Right, so you can't hear it. However, when I turn it off, you feel like, something's missing. So that's what I do with my delays, is that I have the delay in the back just so it adds a vibe. So like if I was to turn it off, you'd be like, oh man, something's missing. The vocal isn't vibing as much, it's not moving as much, right? And that's what that delay and reverb really just doing. It's just adding some vibe, a little bit of movement. Now you can get away with songs where where like you don't even have reverb, or the reverb is super low and there's no delay at all. Sometimes certain styles of like rap, that actually makes perfect sense to do. I've heard a lot of songs like that that sound very good, but I've just always found myself having it on, always use reverb, I always use delay, just because again, it adds this like melodic type of feeling to it. In my opinion, I always like to do it for my style and for other artists I work with as well. I haven't found myself working on someone else's music where I was like, oh man, I want to take all that off. Maybe in the future I'll experiment, right? But so far I've never liked it, right? So I always have both of those on. And the last thing that I always have on in terms of effects is a doubler, right? This is for the main vocal. Now, this doubler 2, or use doubler 4, it's kind of your choice. It doesn't really make a difference. I mean, it makes a difference, but in terms of like what you're trying to accomplish with it isn't too big a deal, right? Now, doubler 4, maybe it gets too chorusy. So doubler 2 is usually like the middle ground for me. So that's why I usually typically just do doubler 2. But again, it's a taste, it's an opinion thing, right? I used in the past, I used to always use doubler 4, right? But now I use doubler 2, and I just work with that workflow because that's just how I like to have my session. So normally you always turn off the direct right, because this is the middle signal. You want the left and right. Now the pan is always maxed out, so you can get the widest sound, because remember, you're blending this technically, right? This is technically parallel no matter what, so you're always blending this. So that's why, you know, leave that maxed out so you can get the most max in your parallel. And now the delay, I will increase it or decrease it just based on how chorus I want it to sound. The more that you add to your delay, the more chorusy it sounds. Now I always have like one of these higher than the other. So either my purple one is higher than my red one, but that just adds a delay between the left signal and the right signal, which will make it sound wider. That's how making things wide works in the first place, where you have a delay between the left and the right. If it's equally balanced, it sounds like it's in the center. That's the phantom center. That's the mono sound. And now the more delay you have from left to right, it makes it sound wider. Now you can affect with how left or right, or how the stereo sound is, based on if left or right is delayed more than the other, like which one it actually is, more less or more. But I mean, in general, that's just how that works, right? So you have a delay, it's a chorus, that's how it works. Chorusy sound, it's detuned. You can raise this detune, but make sure that your other one is always the polar opposite. So like if this is 10, it's -10. If it's 13, we have -13. You always want to make sure that you have it that way. So once you have it set, depth, you can increase this. Positive, and I always just went negative. You can increase this because it adds a little bit of movement. So depth options on effect plugins usually kind of have a feeling of like movement, right? So you don't have to, but you can. Again, it just adds more vibe. You can get some extra vibe out of your plugins, then go ahead and do it. And then right here on this game, when you open it, I think this comes in like 4.1. I usually adjust this because I'll be like, it's a little too bright sometimes, so I'll lower it. But I want it like super bright chorus sounding, I might increase it, or I might even change the frequency that it's at. But sometimes where it comes in is pretty good, and then I just adjust this gain here. You can even roll this off if you want to, but again, it's the taste. A lot of times I don't touch it, but sometimes you just need to, and so you can mess with the EQ. But a lot of times I just mess with this gain here, and that's it. So once this is set, you can go before and after. Let's check it out.
Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there. I just wanna hold you, I just wanna touch you, I just wanna kiss you.
Right, and so right there, like, you notice that it just kind of sounds a little bit more shimmery, a little bit more pushed back and wide, right? And that's what that chorus effect's doing. Now if you listen to the chorus like this, listen to how it sounds maxed out. Now remember, maxed out is where you work with it and then you adjust after that, but look how this is how it actually sounds.
Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there. I just wanna hold you, I just wanna touch you, I just wanna kiss you.
And then you adjust it to make it
nighttime or daytime,
fit, right? And now again, if you have a song where like you like that super chorusy sound and you have this this knob way higher, go ahead and do it. Again, like, this is all to taste. This is all subjective. There's not a right or a wrong way. And this is something that took me a really long time to understand, because when it comes to your effects, it's all to taste. It really is. Your width, everything is all to taste. The only thing that is more objective might be like making sure that you have a good amount of EQ and compression going on. But even with that, how much compression, do you use multiband compression or not, what frequencies should be pulled out, it's just kind of dependent on how you feel about the mix. Now obviously, like, if there's like a high frequency like blowing your ear out on your EQ in terms of your frequencies, then obviously you want to pull that down. But again, I've heard a song, it's called Up by Nav. Go on Spotify, look up Up by Nav. That vocal sounds bad. Like, it's mixed professionally. But in terms of like the frequency spread, it's like piercing your ear. You almost can't listen to it very long. I like the song, but it hurts your ears. So that's an example of like, it really is subjective no matter what. And so once you understand that, you can stop being so hard on yourself about the way that you mix, because at the end of the day, as long as your song is relatively close to the loudness of Spotify songs once you put it on Spotify, and as long as your vocal is like compressed, it's not just like volume jump all over the place, and it's not too quiet, and your performance is good, like it's good enough. That's how it always is, right? Now there's levels to the quality of a mix, of course, but like at the end of the day, most people can't tell the difference. And it took me years to understand that most people cannot really tell. If you tell them to super focus and super compare and super listen, yeah, then they can tell. But again, if they like the song and the song that you did doesn't sound bad, they do not care. They will like the song. They will choose a song that they like in terms of their taste. They will choose a song and listen to that all day that they like over a professional, most amazing, perfect song that they don't like, right? So at the end of the day, you got to keep that in mind, that mixing is way more subjective than you think. But not for my ranting, right? Let's keep going. So next step here is, we have our main vocal set right now. Notice here, like my levels for these two things are always the same, like they're matched on either side. This is just, you know, one and the same bust here in terms of effects. I decided to use this flanger as well. So flangers, cool thing about flangers is that they give you a lot of width, right? So
Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there.
a lot of width. Now if you want to like drop an EQ after or before this and try to like EQ it to make it like sound a little bit more pleasing, you definitely could, but because the level is kind of low, I don't really like trip about it too much. So the way that you would set this is mix should always be at 100, right? Because anything in parallel should always be maxed out. Feedback, it comes out to get 50, and you adjust it based on how flanged you want your effect to be. And then you can use your high pass if you want. I usually do. I don't sometimes, but it just depends. And then I sync this auto, so I rate can be 0.25, 0.5, or 1, right? That way it's actually like locked into like the BPM in terms of like how it actually like it's flanging the rate, so it actually moves well. And then depth always at 100, because any less doesn't sound that good to me. And then I hit link, right? So this kind of works based on your BPM time and everything like that. And so that all works together. Now delay comes in at 2.0. I raise it a little bit sometimes, so like we have 2.3, but sometimes truthfully it just doesn't sound too good if you go any higher or any lower, like way higher, way lower than 2.0. So usually it's a taste again, and you can mess with these waveforms, but in my opinion I always find sine just to be the one that was the smoothest and works the best. And so stereo, I always max it out, because again I want it super wide. If you wanted to put this less than 180, I guess you could, it's not a big deal. The flanger would just like be less wide, but again, if I'm gonna do something to my vocal in parallel, which is what you always kind of do, I'm gonna max it out and then blend it in parallel essentially, right? So we heard how this flanger sounds. Let's go before and after.
Nighttime or daytime, I'll be there. I just wanna hold you, I just wanna touch you, I just wanna kiss you.
See, so what that flanger essentially did was gave a little bit of width and a sense to a vocal, but really it just gives more vibe. Again, like all these effects, they're quiet enough to where like they're not doing nothing crazy, but they're just adding a little bit of feeling, a little bit of vibe, a little bit of movement to your vocal. So it can kind of move and kind of enhance the feeling of your vocal. So it sounds like your vocals vibing, it feels like your vocals moving. Like you kind of be like, hey, like not in your head, you'd be like, hey, just like this. These effects will allow the listener to kind of groove more with it versus just having it sit so cleanly in the middle. It's like, oh, this is perfect mixed vocal and just sitting in the middle, right? It's kind of hard to vibe with that. You need some imperfections, some weird things going on in your stereo field to kind of make them vibe. But some songs, right, like a boom bap type beat, maybe you don't need to do that though, right? Again, it's to taste, right? It's always the taste. Mixing is always the taste. So that's kind of like what it is.